Welcome to episode 31, Construction Nation. This is Sue Dyer, your host of Construction Dream Team, where I interview industry leaders and experts so you can learn about the people side of construction and build your construction dream team based on OPE, other people's experiences. The shortest way to success is to learn from others who've already been there and done that. Well, for the first time ever, we are going to be offering our construction scorecard to any project that would like to utilize it. And this is up until the middle of September. We're doing a beta test to see if other projects would like to utilize this very powerful tool. And then we're going to evaluate whether or not it provides the level of value that it does for our clients. Until now, for decades, we've only offered this to our own clients that we're working with. And I have had so many people say, well, can we have your scorecard? Or we would wish we had a scorecard, or we had a way to evaluate. And we also have an algorithm that we've developed that actually calculates your momentum score. And you can have positive momentum or negative momentum. And this is all part of the scorecard program. So if you're interested in having that be a part of this beta test, just reach out to me at sue@constructiondreamteam.com and we can have a great chat. So that will be great. Thank you so much. I'm excited today to have our guest, who is also going to be the keynote speaker at the Collaboration 2019 International Partnering Institute Conference, Kristin Scroggin. And she started a company called Gen Y Communication Strategies. Because Kristin can't do math or bake a pie, but she's really great at speaking. And so we're so glad to have her here today with us.
Thank you.
Kristin has her master's in communication studies, a bachelor's in communication arts, and has been a communications lecturer at the University of Alabama for 11 years. Her passion is generational diversity. And for the past 5 years, she has spoken across the country on this topic. So welcome, Kristin. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here with you, Sue. I appreciate you having me today.
Well, this is such a treat for us to get more of you and more people to be able to hear you than might just be at the conference. So this is going to be exciting. And I know all of us worry about our industry growing, and the millennials are not coming to construction, and we need to be able to attract them. So this is a really important topic for us. But I know that you've been on a journey to become the founder of your company and to learning about working effectively with millennials. So tell us a little bit about what brought you to this topic and to developing your own firm.
Sure. So originally I was a communications lecturer, and I had this great plan, Sue. I was just going to make everyone love me. I was going to make all my students just think I was the best teacher ever. And then I thought they were going to work super, super hard for me. And that is just not what happened. Essentially, what happened was the more I sort of loved on and parented my college students, the more they thought I was going to hook a brother up, right? They were more likely to take advantage of me. So I actually started looking at generational diversity from a purely selfish standpoint of I wanted to figure out how to get my millennial students to reach their maximum capacity. Because as an educator, that's what I was most interested in. Not necessarily having all the accolades of them loving me, but more of, okay, what's going to be the tactic that I need to use to get the best performance out of this particular group of people? So I began doing research right away. I literally have 11 years worth of research. So the whole first half of the millennial generation has been through my classes. I also have a great point of contact in San Francisco and another person in Pittsburgh who also researched their classes. And this gave us a really wide range so that we weren't running into just a Southern standpoint because, as you mentioned before, I'm in Alabama. And so yeah, we began conducting research, did nationwide surveys, focus groups. And as we began to understand more about millennials, we started going, oh, you know what? We really need to know more about how the Gen Xers and the baby boomers are different in order to help them understand each other all together. So that's sort of what happened is we started launching, getting information about boomers and getting information about norms with Gen Xers. And we put this all together in a presentation that we do literally across the country to organizations talking about you've got to have a plan for attracting and retaining top millennial talent. We're just not in a place where that's not an option for you anymore. So, I've worked with NASA is my biggest client at this point in time. I've worked in all the different branches of NASA. I've worked with military defense. I've worked in the hospitality industry. I've worked with hospitals at this point. So, there's lots of different areas. And I've worked a lot with construction, Alabama linemen, solid waste. So I understand that there's a trade. Gosh, how do I say this? There's really an issue in a blue collar trade focused world at this point in time that's making this an even hotter issue than it is in many of those white collar companies.
Absolutely. It is a big issue in any of the construction trades or any of the trades. They are not coming. There's too many other places for them to go. And so we have to be very attractive. So let's start off with just maybe defining what the heck is a millennial and maybe the other generations.
Sure. Okay. So when you look at different generations, just know that when you do research on this, you're going to find 1,000 different ages, and they're usually going to be in a 5-year age range. And I always say this is because academics have to publish to keep their job. It's not really because there's that much difference in what's going on. But we define millennials as being anyone born between 1985 and 2005. So we took our information from Pew Research, and then we coupled that with the originators of generational research, Strauss and Howe, and found our numbers based on that plus our interviews. So here's what's interesting, Sue. A lot of times when people look at generational diversity, they always look at it in a 20-year span. So that would be from 85 to 2005, right? Well, here's the thing. What we're looking at is what happened in your childhood to shape your perspective of the world. So this is a problem, right? Because kids that were raised in the 80s weren't raised in the same US as kids in the 90s. There was differences in political leaders, in protest, in the economy. All of that was different. And so this is the same thing with baby boomers who were lumped together and raised in the 50s, raised in the 60s. Well, gosh, you and I both know that world was not the same. So what we look at is more micro generations. It's going to be the 7 to 10 years that would, and what would have changed to sort of flip the switch between the two generations. So for us, it's everyone you talk to will clearly cut off the millennial generation in 1996. I think a lot of this has to do with internet, but 96 seems to be the big number. So what's interesting is that those kids that are born in 97 all the way to 2005 have a very different perspective. And this is partially because they were raised by a different set of parents. The millennials were raised by the flower children, right, the hippies of the 60s. And the iGen is what we call the second half of that generation, were raised by Gen Xers, the latchkey kids. So those are really different groups that get lumped in together. So here's the great news for your construction workers. The second half of the generation, or owners, or whatever it is that you're doing in construction, the second half of this generation, the iGen, right, like iPad, iMac, iApple, right, the iGen is the first generation that we have had since the GI Bill that is interested in returning to trade. So they are who you are after. You want those 21, 19, 18, 17-year-olds, which means switching our focus from going after college students right now to focusing on high school students. And a lot of this is because they look at the older sibling, the older millennials, and they say, man, that kid has a college degree from Vanderbilt University, and worth $400,000 and it's in teaching. And look at them, they still work at David's Bridal. Why would I want that life? And so they're now interested. They're saying instead, what I'd rather do is make a lot of money and have a lot more freedom to control the flexibility. So you should see a big boom in entrepreneurship in the second half of the generation and a huge return to trade.
That's very interesting because that's also when you graduate from high school when you would jump into an apprenticeship. So that makes a lot of sense.
It's a natural time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So why should we be focusing on millennials?
Okay, so here's what a lot of people don't know, and I will send you this chart too, Sue, if you want to be able to give it to your readers. And anyone who's coming to the conference will see this chart. So if you look at this U.S. Census Bureau and you look at the breakdown of the United States, what you'll find is that right about 26.7% of the American population are those millennials, and then another 18% are the Gen Zs who are coming up hot behind them. So what this means for your listeners that they've got to get through their head is that right about 46% of the American population is under 33 years of age. Okay, say that again. 46% of the American population is under 33 years of age, which means companies have to figure out how to attract and retain these people in order to have any chance at sustainability. And many companies across this country are functioning from the perspective of, I got to keep my 60-year-old subject matter experts happy. And what's happening is in the process, they're alienating the new generation who's coming in. And those people are flipping. They're leaving really, really fast. And so we have to begin shifting our idea towards how do I attract and retain the top of this generation in order to get sustainability with my company.
That makes a lot of sense. Pure demographics, which we know is occurring just from an age standpoint, but when you add that to the just sheer numbers of the percentage of total population, it makes it kind of an overwhelming trend.
Right. I mean, well, the millennial generation itself is 86 million. And that's the largest generation we've ever had. They're bigger than the baby boomers by 6 million. And the thing is that they just don't know it. They don't know that they're the majority yet. In America, there's two things that make the decisions, right? So the people that have the money and the people that have the power. So the people that have the numbers are the ones that have the power, and the people that have the money are the ones that have the power. So if you've got numbers or if you've got money, then you can make decisions. So here's the thing. Right now, all the boomers, they still have the money, but they don't have the numbers anymore. So as those younger millennials begin actually amassing some sort of fiscal power, you'll see a massive flip in the way that work's done, very similar to the massive flip in the way that work was done when the baby boomers came in and those women said, sisters are doing it for themselves. And all of a sudden you had a wide range of diversity that was coming into the workplace. Similar things are going to happen when the millennials get power.
And demographically, where do you see, what's the window for that flip, do you think?
So 2030 is the year everyone has got to cement in their head. 2030 is the big one. So if you look at charts right now, even if you look at census projections all the way out to 2050, right now in 2020, the majority of eligible workers in our country, that's between 16 and 66, right? The majority of eligible workers at 43% are the millennials. So right now at 2019, 2020, they're already the majority of people from you to pick from. But here's what's so fascinating. They are so big that they sustain that 43% for another 20 years, and then they only drop down to 41%. So they are so big that their birth rate and death rate is expected to balance on either side. So this is really, really important for you to know, is that they're going to stay in power pretty much their entire career. But 2030 is the year that's the tipping point, because in 2030, every baby boomer in this country is eligible to retire. Now, as we all know, many of them won't take it. Most recent AARP survey says 40% of them plan to die at their desk. No intention of retiring ever. But those that do take it, think about in your own organization, how many of those people are your subject matter experts? And what are you doing to extract knowledge from them now in order to pass that on to the next generation?
Very interesting. And I'm a huge believer that demographics drives policy,
Mhm.
practices, everything.
Yeah, you can't
That's,
argue with the data at this point. They
yeah,
have the numbers, and when they have the fiscal power, which they eventually will, when they have that, change will happen.
yes. So let's go back a little bit and talk a little bit about how did the millennials become so different?
So here's the big thing that I really want your listeners to know. Almost everything that you hate about the millennials are things that we culturally put into place. So I'm just going to give you a few examples, Sue, if you'll let me ramble for a few minutes. One of the big examples that I would give is in the late 80s, the Board of Education decided that they were going to put self-esteem campaigns into the public schools. And what their idea was is that it will pump them up with self-esteem so much that they won't want to take drugs and they won't want to get into gangs. Well, that has obviously not worked out. Now you have people that still have drug problems, but they feel really good about it. So the self-esteem is one of the big things that we really, really push. And now you have a group of people who feels really good about themselves who say, I have a standard on how I'm going to be treated. And if you don't treat me to that standard, I deserve better. And they'll bounce. And this is part of why their rate is so extremely high, is they feel good enough about themselves to not just put up with a lot of stuff. Another good example would be that a lot of the things that we told them not to do when we were parents are things that they're actually listening to. So think about, those of you that are listening here, think about when you were wandering around and you had your little toddler behind you and you were talking to him and you'd say things like, oh, don't buy a house, because if you do, invariably the water heater will go out the minute that you want to go on vacation. Or you'll say things like, I love that I have you, but wait until you're older before you have a child, because they really lock things down, right? Or wait till you're older to get married. And so we see the average age getting married across the country right now is 31. And a lot of that is because so many of their parents went through an extremely high divorce rate. And then they looked at their children as children and said, hey, you don't want to go through this. And those millennials said, you're right, I don't want to go through that. So we see them not having children as early or at all. Many of them are perfectly happy with their dogs. We see them not buying houses as frequently. Basically, they're not interested in the life of unhappiness that we've been preaching to them for all these years. So that's one of the big reasons. We also created, the big thing that I would tell you is that we downplayed the idea of excellence. This was the worst thing that we did, is we watered down what it means to be excellent. And just as an example, when I travel anywhere, people will always end up saying, ugh, millennials, participation trophies. Here's the thing, not one millennial ever asked for a participation trophy. Never. It was you hippie parents that went up to the PTA, right, and said, you know what we really need? 11th place trophies. You, the parents, decided that. That was not something that the children did. So when we took away their understanding of, you know what, sometimes people are just better than you at certain things, it's caused them a lot of confusion. So I'll give you another good example. Many of your listeners will remember playing kickball when they were growing up. And you knew who was the best player of kickball. And whether that was you or whether it was not, everyone was very clear on who was the best. And, if you weren't the best, you didn't have to play kickball. You could go over and play with your friends or play house or whatever it is that you did well. You didn't have to do the one thing, but that's not what millennials experienced. Instead, what would happen would be the teacher would see me, the person who doesn't want to play kickball, feel sorry for me. And so she'd make me the captain. So now I have to play every single time. And nobody's, high-fiving the person who really is the best because we're not keeping score anymore. So we watered a lot of those things down. We also put things in place like rubrics for projects where we said, if you want to make an A, you'll hit all of these little check boxes. And if you want to be, you'll have this, this, and this. And so you have people coming even out all the way out of graduate school who are used to having a checklist of everything they're supposed to do in order to be successful. And then they come onto our work sites and we're like, go do your job. And they're like, oh, I don't know what it is and what the measurable is. And so this is why they come and pester you all the time. So having really clear standards and not backing those standards up for anything is one of the number one ways that you can help them. Because here's the thing, we made them this way. If we want certain character refinement to happen, we're going to have to teach that. And that's going to take your listeners getting away from being a manager and on to being a coach.
That's a perfect segue to my next question. So, what would be an action plan for us to take so we can be more effective with the millennials, because they're going to be essential for us?
Absolutely. So the example that I use is this idea of a diamond right out of the mine. If you get a diamond right out of the mine, it's valuable, but you don't want it because it's not been polished up. And what you have to understand is that the younger generation has not been polished. Essentially, what that means is there were not other adults, mostly other than their parents, who were able to weigh in on facets of their personality that maybe needed a little bit of refining in a way that the older generations had. So, Sue, I bet you had somebody when you were growing up. You probably had a teacher that looked at you and was like, hey, Sue, you're not good at math. Let's just get through this, right? 7th grade. Or you had the person that was, hey, don't run in the halls in church or you're going to hell. You had all these people that were able to sort of refine, teachers, coaches, people that were able to weigh in on your behaviors, people that would look at you and say, you don't talk to your parents that way. And what's happened is, as we've moved away from a tribal style of learning, a tribal style of raising children as a whole, we have eliminated the refinement. So now what's happening is you are having people coming in a less polished up state than what you came in at. So what you came in at 23 was way more polished and shiny and edges were chipped up than what they're coming in at 23, because we've disempowered refiners. So this means your listeners are going to have to do way more things that are mentoring focused. And in particular, that's going to come down to training people on soft skills. So the millennial generation is really, really good at knowledge. They have no problem being able to find content, right? If they want to know something, they just say, Alexa or Siri, whatever it is, they can call and get information. Google this. But what they're missing is wisdom, because wisdom comes from hitting your bottom on the ground over and over and over again. And you only usually get wisdom through age or someone else telling you, don't touch the fire. And so this is one of the big things your listeners are going to have to do, is you're going to have to train them on some of these soft skills that they need in order to be successful. So things like regulating yourself when you're angry. How do you calm yourself down? They don't know how to do this. They're used to having mom come in and be like, okay, everybody, smell the roses and blow out the candles. The adult has been the person who's been telling them how to calm themselves down. You're going to have to teach them listening skills that they're not going to be as good at. And again, I'm painting a very wide brushstroke here. And of course, not all millennials fit into this characteristic. There's many, many outlier things that would make you age up. But you are going to have to teach them a lot more about batching their time and their tasks and making sure that they've got good time management skills, understanding how to be self-sacrificing, communicating with clients that they're uncomfortable with. There's going to be a lot more of that stuff, because we took a lot of those classes out of the classroom. We took FBLA, we took DECA, we took OMEC, we took all of that out that taught people parenting classes. Some of you even remember having parenting classes. We took all of that out of the curriculum. And so what's resulted is a lot of people that have very, very low soft skills, great at finding knowledge, amazing at resources, not so good at being able to regulate their temper. So there's going to be a lot more training that's going to have to come in, mentoring and coaching, if you want to be able to retain your rock stars.
So one question that comes to my mind is, since the millennials have the predisposition to just walking because they feel entitled, more or less, how can we approach this learning? Are they going to hang around to learn when it's hard and maybe, you're going to be telling them things they don't want to hear?
Right.
So how there's going to be some kind of balancing act there, I can see.
It is. So just listening to what you were talking about at the very beginning of your podcast and your intro, where you were talking about let's bring together experts and learn from them. That's a Tony Robbins sort of concept, right? Of bring all the brilliant people together and get as much information from them as they possibly can. But one of the big things that Tony Robbins talks about a lot is this idea of building rapport. And that is something that we as a country are not very good at. We're good at making rules. We're good at giving commands, but we're not good at building rapport and relationships with our employees. And this is partially because the baby boomers who are in charge, the traditionalists who were their bosses, wanted nothing to do with them on a personal level. And so it's difficult for them to build rapport in the same sort of way because, again, they don't want to be taken advantage of. So this is one of the big things that I would tell all of your people is you're going to have to get those people to respect you before you start dropping a lot of commands on them. They have to respect you, value your input, care about you as a person, and then they're more interested in hearing what you have to say. Just because I said so does not work for this generation. And that's because their mom and daddy didn't say that to them. Right? This is a generation that their mom said, what do you want to eat tonight? And it was perfectly fine for all 4 children to have completely different choices, and mom would make all of those. Or they'd say, where would you like to go vacation? I never remember my parents asking me, where do I want to go on vacation? That wasn't a choice I got to make. But that is very, very common for millennials to have been able to weigh in on things and be able to give their opinion. So when they work in an environment that is not interested in their opinion, that shuts them down because they basically haven't been alive enough, it has nothing to do with their skill. If they didn't have any skill, you wouldn't be hiring them to your site. You don't like it. This is, if we're getting really down to it, a lot of why we make people wait is not because we're interested in building their wisdom or their skill. It's because we went through the same thing. And if I went through it, then by God, you're going to go through it. And that is a really big problem because millennials won't stay because their nest is so soft. So Sue, I'm sure you had the same situation as I did. So I'm a Gen Xer and my parents looked at me and said, look, here's the thing. You're not living with us. Right? You're not coming back home to the Scroggin house once you've got your college degree. And so that was important for me to know. And that is not what the millennials have experienced. They've been allowed to bounce back. Their nest is very soft. And so they can walk away with a lot less threat than what the Gen Xers and the baby boomers have. So that means you're going to have to spend more time pouring into them, building rapport, growing them as people if you want to see any kind of longevity. Do it because I said so does not work for this generation. And that's what I see the biggest problem in home builders associations, linemen, things like that. They're used to being able to give a command and it is immediately acknowledged. And that is just not happening with this generation. And so that's going to mean a change in the way that you deliver information. And here's the thing. Your listeners today could say, well, I'm not going to do that. Well, that's fine. Enjoy your turnover. That's the best I can tell you. If we don't modify in order to attract and retain the top ones, then you're only got 2 choices. You're going to end up with the crappy ones, the bottom of the barrel, who will do whatever it takes because no one else will take them anymore. Or you're going to have constant turnover. Those are your choices. So we're going to have to make the decision to pour into, to spend money on training, to grow, to do more of an apprenticeship style training on people. We no longer can just say, all right, I'm going to onboard you for 2 days and throw you to the wolves and think they're going to stay. They just don't live in that kind of world. So continuous feedback is going to be important. Making sure you catch them doing right as often as you catch them doing wrong is going to be important. And it doesn't matter if it sounds like coddling or not. If you want to keep a rock star, that's what you're going to have to do.
It sounds to me like we also need to think about the organizational cultures themselves have to be one of high trust, or you're not going to be able to build the rapport. They're not going to stay.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that I commonly say in my presentations is that millennials can sniff out a double standard at 100 yards. So anytime there's a double standard that's happening in a company, they're going to exploit it for their own gain. So a great example would be, do you have somebody around your office that's a chatter? They just walk around and they're chatting all the time, and you never really see them work. You just mostly see them talk to other people. If you've got somebody that's like that in your organization, especially if they're high up in your organization and they're allowed to spend large amounts of time, 45 minutes at a stroke, being able to stand in someone's doorway and talk about football, then that millennial knows you don't actually care about them being 10 minutes late. Because if you valued time, you would hold them to the same standard. And we don't. And that's the thing, is that millennials feel good about themselves enough to look at you and say, I deserve to be held to a similar standard. And so if you're going to drop a rule, you need to drop that rule on everyone.
Yes. So that's a fairness issue. Yeah.
Absolutely. And a lot of why they leave is because they feel like it is not fair. Now, do they have a skewed view of fairness? Absolutely. Because their moms told them that they were shiny diamonds, that they could be anything they want when they grow up. But that's just not true. You can't be anything you want when you grow up. I would love to be a supermodel. That is not going to work out for me. So, it's just not going to happen. So the thing is that they've got to understand that if this is their calling and this is something that they love and they're passionate about, then, there's give and take on this process, and that they need to absorb as much content from as many brilliant people as they can, and, understand when to take it personally and when to stand up for themselves and when to let it go. And all of that is soft skill training. And they've not been trained on any of that.
It is. And I would also see that if you're really going to be able to mentor them, there has to be this level of trust that they have in you, that you can give them a vision and the skills for them to elevate themselves wherever they want to go. But of course, it's going to be where they want to go.
Where they want to go, right? But the example that I use is that when I was in school, the teachers that I really liked, if I liked them as a person, that's who got my best work. And the people that were jerks, they just got whatever was left over. But we're actually finding a more of a flip with the millennials. What I find is they don't work well for jerks. Okay, so I'm not saying that, but millennials work really hard for two characteristics. Number one, someone that they respect, someone that's very consistent. Even-tempered, can hold themselves together in hard situations. That is a real, authentic person. So if they respect you, that's number one. And then the second thing is that they're a little bit afraid of you. You cannot be absolute best friends with this person. There should be a respect line that has been drawn where they know if you were to blow up and get mad at them, it would be really bad, but that you have enough sense to not be that kind of person. So the people that they seem to work the hardest for is people that they really respect, which is the hardest thing to get, and people that they are just a little bit intimidated by.
That's very exciting, actually. Yeah, because I think that's something people can achieve.
Absolutely. You cannot be their office mom or office dad and expect for them to not treat you like they're their child.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're always going out of your way to take up the slack for them, then guess what? They don't learn anything.
Yeah.
And they become more and more reliant on you.
So I know in your work, you have worked with a lot of challenges with millennials. So can you tell us a little bit about one of the challenges that you've faced and what you kind of did to make it improved?
Sure. So here's a funny one for you. So when I first started my business, of course, and anyone that's an entrepreneur will understand this idea that at some point in time, you have to think about scalability, right? How are you going to scale what it is that you do? So my original idea was I was going to bring in some of my former students who were excellent speakers, and I was going to train them on all my material. And then basically I was going to farm them out to all these different companies so that we were still making money, so that I could be working one place and they'd be working another place and they'd be working another place. Now, funny little side note is all of these people were all millennials. And of course, I'm very comfortable with millennials because I've taught with them forever. And so I understand the ebb and flow of their work style, and that they're not necessarily going to turn something in instantaneously. But my assistant, what has been before coming to work with me, was a legal assistant for 20 years at a law office. And she is used to being able to give a command and it immediately happen. And she doesn't like, a weird workflow. She prefers you to be in an office for 8 to 5. And so this was a huge conflict, right? Because you had two different managers that were managing in completely different styles. My style was much more of, as long as you're producing amazing content, I'm good. Where her style was much more of the corporate, I need you to be here at a certain time. I need you to fill out this paperwork at a certain time. And so what ended up happening was I ended up actually having to have a conversation with the administrator, not the millennial, with the administrator in this situation and saying, look, here's the thing. If we want to keep these top people, then we are going to have to figure out how to work within their particular workflow. And that was really difficult. It was difficult for her. It was difficult for me. I'd never actually managed millennials. It was, when I was a teacher, I could always look at them and say, hey, do this or I'm going to fail you. And it was a lot more difficult when now they have all your content and your information and your client lists. So, that would be the big thing that I would tell you is that instead of going, and of course I work with the millennials too and helping them improve their skills there, especially time management and understanding how to take rejection. If you made a cold call and that person said, no, we're not interested, you don't have to go cry all day. So, it was teaching them on either side, but I learned a valuable lesson because I was frustrated. I was absolutely frustrated with both ends of this. I was frustrated from the hyper procedure type A law office concept. And I was frustrated by I'll get to that whenever I get to it. I might be working at that at 2:00 in the morning. Don't be mad that I don't respond to any of your emails. So that I would say, the big thing that I learned on that was that there's a happy medium in between, and you've got to find the workflow that works the best for your particular corporate culture.
That sounds like very wise advice for us because and it's going to be different for each culture. But
Exactly.
what I'm envisioning and seeing is that for many companies in construction, maybe not the larger, more sophisticated, but most of the companies, there's going to have to be a big cultural shift for the millennials to come and stay.
Absolutely. It's not even going to be close. Like when I work with Alabama Power, one of the things that we talk about is they call it the great line shift, right? This idea of at some point in time, all of the knowledge makers are going to be off of shift and the new group is going to come on. Well, if you don't have anybody to switch shifts with you, it's really hard to get things done. So we don't have a choice. We're going to have to figure out how to work scheduling better. In construction, this is one of the biggest ones. And I have the same thing in tourism and service industries is they want as much control over their schedule as they possibly can have. And that is so counterintuitive to the baby boomers. They feel like they earned the right to do the scheduling. And millennials basically say, look, if I tell you that I got to be out this day and you tell me I have to come in anyway, even though I've told you that it's my daughter's 3rd birthday party, I'm not staying with you much longer. And that's a huge difference because that baby boomer was trained by the traditionalist. You skip that 3rd birthday party and you come here or you don't have a job. And millennials are like, all right, well, if you fire me, I'll just move on to the next thing. So again, very different circumstances for those two groups. And so they can't be expected to operate in the same way.
The other thing I see in construction, especially people working in the field, but really anywhere, whether it's design, whether it's inspection in the field, whether it's project managers, construction managers, really anywhere, an owner's group, it takes years and many projects to really learn how to operate effectively. And so you've got to have people that are there on a regular basis for a long period of time and are on a project from the beginning, middle, and end, and another project beginning, middle, and end, so that you see the entire thing so you know what to do. And it's by learning this, oh, I know what we do when we have this problem. I know what we do when this occurs. I know how to deal with this. It takes decades to learn that.
Absolutely.
And so it's essential that you have people that come and stay, or you're going to have constant holes where you're always starting over.
Right. And when we talked about that idea of 2030, I don't know if you remember that year, 2030, when all those baby boomers do leave, what'll happen is the Gen Xers will shift into those positions, but temporarily. So one of our most interesting pieces of research is that the average Gen Xer plans on retiring at 57 years of age. So they'll be retiring at the same time that a lot of other people above them will be retiring if all goes well. But a lot of this has to do with being able to invest in 401ks and all this kind of good stuff. But regardless, they're going to shift up, but only temporarily, which means your millennials have to be able to shift into middle management. And that's going to be your project managers. And if you haven't been able to keep those millennials around long enough to see projects from beginning to end, then there is no way they can lead a team on that. You having a college degree stamp saying that you understand this conceptually and you doing it are two totally different things. So we have to figure out how to get them to stay. And that's going to be through mentoring, building rapport, training, dangling good incentives, allowing them to be part of the decision-making process for at least scheduling, giving them some more freedom if we want them to eventually become our middle managers.
Yes, I see that very clearly. So tell us just a little bit about some of the other generations, because it is the comparison that makes it so interesting and maybe helps us, whether we're a baby boomer or a Gen Xer or a millennial, we can kind of see the differences between the generations and be more effective in working together.
Absolutely. So the big thing that everyone needs to understand about the baby boomer generation, and again, remember, we really talk about this in micro generations. So the older part of the generation is going to be quite different and they're going to be right around, gosh, I guess at this point they'd be 74-ish. The oldest of that group would be 74 to 64, right around in that. Is the first half of the baby boomer generation. And these people are going to have been raised by traditionalists. Those traditionalists were the people who went through the Great Depression, and they would have been some of the first people to go off to World War II. So those older baby boomers had a lot of pressure from their parents to get a job, because obviously the Great Depression, that becomes the most important thing for their kid to have. And again, not because those kids actually went through the Great Depression, the boomers didn't, but there was this sort of idea of, if that happens in your childhood, it lingers around. You continue to be worried about it. So you have that one factor of money is always going to be sort of something that freaks people out. But for baby boomers, the older boomers in particular, the idea of having a job is the most important thing for them. And this is a lot of reason why they're not retiring, is because their job and their identity are intertwined. The other thing you have to understand about them is that they were so big. Basically, dad got off the boat from World War II, kissed mama, made a whole lot of babies. They outnumbered their parents 3-1, and they saw kids everywhere they went. So competition became a huge thing for the baby boomer generation. So this idea of have a job and be competitive in that job and understand that that job could be taken away at any given moment really drives a lot of their decision-making still to this day. The second half of that generation, I call them the flower children. Other people call them the me generation. But those would have been the people who were raised during the civil rights movement. They were children during hippiedom. So they didn't go to the Summer of Love because they were too young, or they didn't go to Woodstock, but they would have listened to all the artists, had all the posters on their walls, things like that. So one of the things we've seen is that HR really emerges from the second half of this generation. They're the ones that are much more interested in the whole self and appealing to the whole self and building rapport. And the older part of this generation is not nearly as interested in that. So tapping into that to the second generation is going to be a better thing. The other thing that you need to know about the second half of that generation, that's going to be basically your 64 to 54-year-olds, is that they would love to retire, but they can't. This was the generation that really got hit hard in the Great Recession. And so because they can't go, because many of them are taking care of their parents and they're also taking care of their hot mess millennial children, they financially can't walk away. So it's interesting. One of the things that I have a lot of clients that talk to me about is that there's this weird sort of hole of apathy that's happening in that second half of the generation of, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm over this. I want to be able to retire, but I can't get out. And there's some frustration that happens with that. So But I'm all about a good hippie. The next generation down in the 20-year span is called Gen X. So just as a side note for your listeners, we call a generation by letter until they call themselves by name. And we still call Gen X Gen X. And that's because they don't care what you call them. They are the least collectivistic of all of the groups of people. They don't really care about hanging out together. Most Gen Xers, and that's going to be people, again, between 53 and 33 years of age, most Gen Xers want to come in, do their work, and go home. They're not interested in any social element connected to the organization. So when these companies are like, let's have an employee appreciation day, and we'll make everybody leave the site, drive 20 minutes to the park, feed them steak that they may or may not even like, and then expect them to still get back to the site and work on time, that doesn't feel like appreciation to Gen Xers. That feels like you have to come here, eat our food, and then you have to leave. You've taken away that hour of flexibility in their life. So Gen Xers really value flexibility. Zennials, in particular, in the second half of this, would have been latchkey children. And so they cannot handle any level of micromanagement whatsoever. There's this sort of idea of, if you're going to boss me around and tell me what to do, then why don't you just do it on your own? So Zennials in particular and Gen Xers are very, very independent spirits, and they don't seem to need the social elements that go along with the generation nearly as much. And then on the other side of, let me talk real quick about iGens, because I've spent a lot of time talking about the first half of millennials. Those iGens, and that's going to be your kids that are 23 to 13 at this point. Those iGens are a boomerang, right? They don't want to be like the older millennials. This is the group that's interested in trade. But the important thing for your listeners to know is that they're completely addicted to their cell phones. And that will not be going away anytime in the future. Cell phone addiction is like any other addiction. The more you add on it, the more you need. So the cell phone thing is going to become more and more of a thing. And then the 13-year-olds and below right now are called Generation Z. And many people are wanting to lump the iGens in with Generation Z, but again, because of the 20 rule, they really should be totally different groups. But Gen Zs are going to be your 13-year-olds and below, and these are going to be kids that have that really experienced life post 9/11. So they really have been kind of wrapped in bubble wrap. But a lot of their parents are Zennials. And so we want them to be super independent because we're like, you're not living with me. So there's this idea of, hey, I'm going to put a GPS tracker on your arm and then you can go ride around the neighborhood all you want to. So there's a lot more flexibility we're seeing on the second half if, and here's the key, if that child was not born to people later in their lives. So if that child was born to, let's say, a 40-year-old couple, then they're still going to be bubble wrapped. Like in a way that the ones who are coming in now at 6, 7, 8 are going to have a lot more freedom.
It's just totally fascinating and so helpful to all of us who are going to have to be out there working with all the generations, because we're all living longer and living together too. So it's very, very helpful. I appreciate so much you coming. How can people get in touch with you?
Sure. So I have lots of different ways. The biggest way would be to go and check out my website. It's Gen Y Communications. That's GENWHY Communications.com, Gen Y Communications. And that there you'll find sample videos of me speaking. You'll see all the different topics that we speak about. Basically, if it's communication, touches any level of communication, not just generational diversity, then it's something that we do training on. Another way that you can get in touch with us is our Facebook page. And so if you go to Facebook /Gen Y Communications, then you'll find us there. Also on Instagram, Gen Y Communications, and then on Twitter, we're at Gen Y Training. The last big way that you can get us is that I also have a podcast, Sue, that I would love for you to share with your listeners, and it's called Gen Them. the Gen Them podcast, GENTHEM, and they can find that on Apple, or they can find that on Google, or they can just go right over to Stitcher or SoundCloud and listen live. And that's probably the best ways for you to get in touch with us at this point.
And I will put all of those into the show notes so everyone will have access to that. So I thank you so much, Kristin, for coming and spending time to share on a topic that I think is so essential for all of us in the construction industry, and maybe a tad perplexing too. So I know that we all need to create strategies, and maybe you'll come back and share again some strategies for us. That would be awesome.
Absolutely. We definitely have some, actually on my website, there's a workbook that you can do that kind of works you through some of the strategies that you are welcome to get also.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. And I know you're going to break a leg at the Collaboration 2019 tomorrow too. So thank you so much.
I'm super excited.
Well, wasn't this a fabulous episode, everyone in Construction Nation? We are so privileged to have Kristin come and share with us today. My mind is just really floating with all kinds of ideas, and also that feeling that, oh, that's why they're that way. So with understanding comes acceptance, and with acceptance allows us to maybe develop the rapport that is needed for us to have the kind of dream team that we all want. And so remember, Construction Nation, dream teams don't just happen. They are built one step at a time. And remember, every single guest that's been on Construction Dream Team has shared their favorite resource. We've got all sorts of them from Kristin here that are on her website for you. And we have all of these accumulated for you on our Dream Team website. If you go to constructiondreamteam.com/resources, they're all there for you. And there's some just great things. It's really the collective wisdom of all of the guests. So please go ahead and look at those and enjoy. We'll also put Kristin's podcast on there so that you can enjoy that there. Remember that Construction Dream Team drops every Monday morning at 4 a.m. Pacific time. So please join me next week when I will interview another industry leader or expert about the people side of construction, so you can learn how to create your construction dream team. Thank you so much, Kristin, for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
And I will catch everyone next time.